As some of you know, that I do all of my bromoils using liquid emulsion. I coat the paper myself. I don't use traditional silver paper. I've just started playing around with oil printing a little bit, but I think I've got my system down pretty well with the liquid emulsion. And if there's any of you on here who are kind of new to the whole bromoil process, some of the problems that people are encountering nowadays with the newer commercial paper is that they have hardeners in them. You're getting problems with the snowball effect or the white spots on the paper, and you guys are having to coat the back of the paper first. It seems to be getting pretty complicated. And then most of this conventional silver papers nowadays have hardeners in them, which is one of the things that's causing part of the problems. And it kind of inhibits the ability of the matrix to accept the ink in a consistent manner, which is one of the reasons why I like going with the liquid emulsion. It's very consistent in what I do. So if you're looking for resource books, some of you know Emulsion from Denmark. He's the photographer who basically came up with this process with the liquid emulsion and bromoils and popularized it. He's got a couple of books and a couple of YouTube videos out there. He doesn't go into great detail in those things about it. So I started looking around on the internet, and I found these two books from Martin Reed and Sarah Jones, which is a silver gelatin book. It's very informative on making your own silver gelatin. It's got a lot of formulas in it. The downside is that some of those formulas are pretty old, and there's some typo errors in the formulas. So you got to be a little careful of that. Denise Ross put out her book on handmade silver gelatin emulsion printing. She does all of her printing with liquid emulsion and makes her own. And so this is actually a pretty good book that talks you through the whole process. But she doesn't address the issue of making bromoils. She's got like one page that talks about it, and that's about it. So she's not a bromoil artist at all, which is one of the things that prompted me to put my own little book out there. I've tried making liquid emulsion from scratch. It's kind of a fussy process. I don't know if any of you guys have tried it before. You can get good results out of it, but it's a little too exacting and time consuming for me. There's basically 3 commercially made liquid emulsions available here in the US, FOMA, Rolly, and Liquid Light. To the best of my knowledge, none of them have hardeners in them. With FOMA, you get a little bottle of hardener with it, which I just throw it away. I don't even use it. Go to the next page. FOMA emulsion is equal to about a grade 3 contrast grade, comparing it to normal silver paper. Rolly is as well. It's very similar to the FOMA, but Rolly also makes a variable contrast version. Unfortunately, it's a lot more expensive. Liquid Light has been around for a long time. It seems like it doesn't work nearly as well for bromoils. I've tried it before. I didn't have as good a luck, so I stopped using it. But both FOMA and Rolly are equally good. I've used the Rolly before as well, and they both have equal results. I did a little searching around the internet and found 3 other types of liquid emulsions that I don't know if any of them are still available. I think PhotoSpeed LA30 is over in Europe. The cost that I found was 41 pounds for 250 milliliters, which is exorbitantly high. Okay. Tetanol used to make one called Work Photo Emulsion. Luminous Silverprint SE1. I don't think either of those 2 are available anymore commercially. I think they're not making them anymore. Okay. Next. FOMA is what I use. It's very readily available here in the US. You buy it in bottles that are 1 liter in size. 1 liter size bottle in the processes that I do, you can coat up to about 20 11 by 14 sheets of paper if you're coating with a glass rod. And you can go up to maybe double that if you're brush coating the paper. Okay. The current costs for, current costs for FOMA and Rolly are in the US here. The 2 dealers we buy them from mostly here are Freestyle and B&H. The FOMA is the same at both places. Rolly, the price goes up considerably over the FOMA, and the Rolly variable contrast even more so. You can get the Rolly in smaller bottles that are 300 milliliters from B&H. Freestyle only has the bigger ones, but they're both competitively priced. There's basically three ways you can coat with liquid emulsion. You can coat with a brush, you can coat with a glass rod, or you can coat with a metal rod that has a wire spiral wound around it. And there's a couple of places you can buy those things from. It's kind of the way they use more for commercial printing rather than us as photographers. There's also a device called a Maori rod, and Michael Clark, who's in our group here, has talked about it before. He made one himself. It's just another way to coat with essentially with a glass rod, and it's a little device that you make yourself. Liquid emulsion, you have to keep it in the refrigerator, and you only take it out and heat it up when you're ready to use it. You don't want to reheat it too many times because it can start to affect the contrast of it. So if you keep it in the original 2-liter container and heat it and cool it and heat it and cool it and heat it and cool it, you may start to have problems. So I take as much out of the container as I need for any one session and then heat it up in a separate container, okay? So for anybody who wants to start trying this, brush coating is by far the easiest way to do it. It's quick and simple to do. It's less expensive per print because the emulsion goes farther. You end up with a little bit thinner coat of the emulsion on the paper. The big issue with brush coating is you have to learn how to deal with brush strokes. And you will get brush strokes first starting out. There's a technique on how to minimize the brush strokes. One of the advantages of the brush coating is you can coat all the way to the edge of the paper. With the glass rod coating, and you'll see in a couple of minutes here, you lose about 3/4 of an inch all the way around the outside of the paper. So, okay, next. The picture here is of a water bath that I bought on the internet for heating my, you don't have to use a water bath. You can heat it up in a bowl of hot water. You just need to get the emulsion up to about 125 degrees or so, where it's melted. I just take out as much as I need and put it in a beaker and stick it in the water bath here and heat it up. It takes about 25 minutes to heat it up from its chilled condition. When you're doing brush coating, brush it on dry paper. You don't brush it on wet paper, and you also have to coat it twice. So you coat it once, let it dry for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, and then coat it a second time. If you only coat it once, you're going to have a problem with not getting enough contrast in your shadows. Okay. And then on brush coating, you can dry it flat, so you can put your paper out on drying screens like you would normally do if you dry your silver prints that way. For minimizing brush strokes, this is the technique that I use, and Emil Schilt covered this in one of his books, is that once you spread all the emulsion out evenly on your paper, you take your brush and you coat in 4 different directions from top to bottom. And each time you change the direction that you're coating, you ease up on the pressure you're putting on the paper. So the last time, it's just the weight of the brush that's going over the surface of the paper. But you do have to work fairly quickly with this, because as the emulsion starts to cool, and it starts to cool quickly, it will start to set up. So once you start brushing, you got to work fast. Okay. So hopefully the video will work here. So I'm doing brush coating here. I just used normal gelatin, and I've put some watercolor paint in it so you can see the color in it. And this is just normal paper here. So here it is, brushing the emulsion out quickly on the paper to the size of the image that you want to do. It's just a normal, simple paintbrush. There's nothing fancy about it. And then this is the process going in the 4 different directions, easing up on the pressure each time you change your direction. Okay, and this will help minimize the brush strokes. This is a cheap watercolor drawing paper that I used here. So you see it's starting to buckle a little bit here and there. A normal paper that we use doesn't do this. So, and here it's a very light pressure here, and it smooths it out fairly well. And then the last direction here, it's very light. It's only the weight of the brush itself that I'm dragging across the paper. And this is about the amount of time you have to work on the paper before the emulsion starts to set up. And if you keep going at it, then you'll have problems. Okay. Coating in with a glass rod is what I do all the time. You get better coating on your paper this way. It's very, very consistent. Once you try this and work out the system a few times, you get really good results from this, very consistent. So I use a glass rod or a puddle pusher like you might use for calotypes or platinum printing. You don't have to have a glass rod with a little handle on it. You don't have to buy the expensive puddle pusher from one of the photo supply houses, you can just use a glass rod and hold on to the two ends of the glass rod itself. You need to wrap each of the end with some Mylar tape, and I use about 7 wraps of Mylar tape on mine. Denise Ross's book, she says she uses like 10 to 12 wraps, and I found that is way more than you need for bromoils. Okay. You coat the paper wet. You don't have to heat it or anything, but just throw the paper in a tray of water for about 4 or 5 minutes at the most. That's all you need. And then you coat the paper on a sheet of glass because you need to keep the paper on the glass after you coat it. Okay. Next. So I do a little setup here that has a little. You have to have these 2 guide rails that you clamp down to each 2 sides of the paper, and then your puddle pusher or your glass rod goes in between those. So you heat up the emulsion so it's melted. Soak the paper in the water for a few minutes. Drain the paper, put it on a sheet of glass that's on a level surface. I have a piece of granite on my countertop here that's my level surface, and I put the glass on top of it. And then put the paper on the glass and cover it with a sheet of acetate film and squeegee the excess water off. Denise Ross recommends putting the acetate film on it because you don't run a risk of doing any damage to the paper from the squeegee that you use. You probably don't need to use that if you don't want to. Then you clamp the 2 guide rails on, leave a little bit of wiggle room on the puddle pusher, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, because you don't want it to bind up as you're coating the paper. And then you pour the emulsion starting on one side carefully. And you've got a fair amount of time to work with here compared to the brush coating. So go slowly. Pour the emulsion within about 1/2 or 3/4 of an inch of the one side of the paper. And then evenly pour it out all the way across the paper. So when the emulsion's on the paper, it's going to cover about 1/3 or maybe even more of the paper than the size of the paper itself. That's how much emulsion that you use. And then you just pull the glass rod across the paper and pull the excess emulsion right off the edge. And then you have to let it sit flat for at least a 1/2 an hour. Don't move it. You can move the piece of glass over to another work table to set it down, but it needs to be level because you don't want the emulsion to slosh out to one side or the other. So you let it sit for 30 to 40 minutes. Then you can pull the paper off the glass and hang it up to dry vertically. Never dry it flat. I learned this the hard way. For whatever reason, if you dry it flat, as the paper itself starts to dry from the water that's in it, the paper will tend to start to curl up. And as it curls up, the moisture goes down to the bottom of the paper, and you can actually get these cloud lines that form in the bottom of the paper when you try to dry it flat. So you got to hang it up. So you need some place in your darkroom to hang it. Okay. So this is the video of the glass rod coating here. So here you see the glass here where the 2 side rails are just sitting on the glass at this point. So I've soaked the paper in the water. I'm just going to set it down on the glass here. And then here I put the acetate film on top of it. And again, I don't know if this is absolutely needed or not. Denise Ross suggested it, so I just do it this way. And then you just squeegee over the top of the acetate. Take the acetate off. Now you put the guide rails on and clamp them down. And you will get some emulsion seeping underneath the edges of the guide rails. It's inherent with this process. So I just deal with it. It's going to happen. Here's the puddle pusher, and I position the 2 glass rods here and then clamp the 2 glass rods down just with normal clamps. And again, you need a little bit of wiggle room for your puddle pusher so it doesn't bind up. So you see I just test it here to make sure it slides easily across there. So now my emulsion has been heated up. And I pour it, like I said, to within about a 1/2 an inch of the edge of the paper. And then go evenly across the paper like this. If you don't do it evenly, then you may end up getting the emulsion may not coat evenly all the way down. And you just take it all the way off the edge of the paper. And you can see how super smooth the coating is here. You can see the reflections beyond it. And you can get coatings like that every single time. It works really, really well. You've got some other options available with the brush coating process. You can do random brush strokes like the photo on the left. This is actually a toned silk print. It's not a bromoil. The one in the middle, this stuff does really cool things if you're into lith printing, because you get oranges and purples in the transitions between the mid-tones and the lights. The trick on the snatch point of your lith printer is not when you don't judge the snatch point by the blacks. You judge the snatch point by the oranges that show up. Because if you leave the print in the developer too long, the oranges turn gray and you lose that effect. So, and then Emil Schilt does a lot of stuff in his books about melting the emulsion. Use hot water and a brush on your silver print, and you can manipulate the emulsion. I've not had a huge amount of success with this myself, so I don't really try it very much. But the photo on the right just shows kind of some of the things you can do with actually melting the emulsion. This is just a straight silver print. That's not a bromoil. So, okay. And there you go.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I've got a few different questions, but I'm gonna open it up first. Tony.
Dan, thanks. That was super and very clear. Do you coat under red light or in normal daylight?
No, you have to coat under safe light.
Safe light.
But the liquid emulsion is photosensitive, so you have to do it in dark room.
So just ordinary safe light in a dark room. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
The downside of it is that, you know, it's kind of a slow process, and you're going to be stuck in your dark room if you're doing any number of sheets to code. You're going to be stuck in the dark room for a long time. So, and you have to have a place where you can hang your prints. That's what's important. So, to dry, so it's out of the light. So
you have some kind of dark box that you store it in?
No, what I have is I'm extremely lucky here at my house. When my wife and I bought our house 3 years ago, we have a little guest house here, because casita is what we call them in California. And my wife let me have it for my photography stuff. So my casita is my dark room, and I'm probably one of the few people that actually has a full bathroom in my dark room. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And I have a closet in there, and my closet is my hanging area. So that's where I can hang all my prints. So
nice.
It works really well.
Dan, can you tell us about your negatives? Because I understand you use real film.
I do. Probably 95% of the film I work with is 8x10. I do some work with 4x5, but it's usually 8x10. I don't do any 8x10 Bromoil prints, and I hardly do any 11x14s anymore. It's mostly 16x20. I do big prints. And I found that the more I got into this, the more I dislike the smaller prints, and the big prints are really kind of infectious when you start doing them. And so the 16x20s are what I normally work with. So I'm working with film negatives. An important thing about this process is that I found that you really want negatives that do not have a very wide density range. If you have a densitometer, the ideal range, and to not have to do a bunch of dodging and burning, is about 0.8 in the density range between your highlights and your shadows. And a normal negative, a normal silver printing, may be 1.2 or something like that. So a normal developed negative will probably mean you have to do dodging and burning when you make your initial silver print, which I don't necessarily like to do very much in the darkroom. But so that's why I try to work with the negatives that I have already that are not really super contrasty, to say the least. So, but you can work with denser negatives, you can work with thinner negatives. It's just the density range from one side to the other that's more important. So,
if you're taking a new shot on film, would you underdevelop then? Or?
No, because, and the reason for that is that the majority of the lenses that I use are old century lenses that are uncoated, and they turn out, they're very inconsistent in the contrast range that I get out of the images, out of the negatives that I produce with them. And so I just kind of roll the dice and say, okay, let's take the shot as if it was a good lens, and we'll see what the negative turns out like. And that'll make my decision whether I'm going to use it for bromoils or use it for silver prints, because I do a lot of silver printing too. So
I don't know if anybody can hear me.
yeah, we can hear you.
I would like to add something if I could.
Sure.
When you buy your bottle of emulsion, I've worked with it for years. I agree. You should split it up. And I use film canisters. Oh,
I've heard other people do that too. I've just never done it myself. So
the trouble with film canisters, though, first of all, do this in safe light, the entire process, because the film canisters, once you start warming up the emulsion, can pop it open. And I learned the hard way. So that was the tip I wanted to pass along.
Can I ask a question that's kind of related to that, actually, about decanting? I wanted to know, so I have the Rolly Black Magic, and I was thinking of decanting it, like Thomas just mentioned. And I was wondering, because I am cognizant of not reheating it all the time, can I, how solid is it? Can I go in without melting it, dig out some kind of in a semi-gel form and put it in these smaller canisters to decant it, or do I have to melt the whole thing first to decant it?
No.
Mine's a gel.
You can spoon it out, but as you take it out of the refrigerator, it's pretty dense.
Yeah.
And it takes some amount of strength to actually kind of get it out. Thomas, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do.
What I would recommend you do is take it out of the refrigerator and let it sit in your darkroom for 45 minutes and soften up a little bit. It'll make the job easier. So,
okay. And then I can spoon it in, and then I'm not melting it to a full liquid point to pour to decant.
yes.
Perfect. Okay.
Well, I found that heating it up twice, it doesn't affect it at all.
No.
Anything after that, I don't recommend. But if you're going to decant, I would heat it up for maybe just a minute. Even after it's been at room temperature, it'll just make the whole process much faster. But it's very runny at that. At that point too.
I don't worry about decanting, because doing the bigger prints that I do, a normal print session for me, I'll use about 400 milliliters of the developer of the emulsion at one time. So I'm taking almost half of the developer out of the canister to start with. So because I'm doing the big prints, because I like to try to coat about maybe 5 or 6 sheets of paper at a time, because it's an annoying process to go through the whole coating process. And, I'd rather be making the prints rather than dealing with that. So, but if you're doing smaller prints, then yeah, I think getting some small canisters that are light proof would be a great idea. So
Perfect. Thank you both so much for those tips.
Can I ask, your puddle pusher, have you tried it with gelatin? And if so, how good does it work?
well, yeah, the videos that I showed there, those were just a straight 10% solution of gelatin with watercolor paint added to it. So just for demonstration purposes. So yeah, there's no reason, and it coated just fine. That was a 10% solution, so of gelatin.
Excellent.
So yeah, if you're doing oil printing, and you want to try this and get very even coating, that might be another alternative way to do it.
I also did glass plates, dry plates, using liquid emulsion, and it works really well with this process. I think the rod it would work better for even coating, because I'm using like the collodion method of tilting the plate.
Oh yeah.
And the glass just makes it cool off really fast. So I've been meaning to buy one of those coating glass.
Well, the puddle pushers, if you buy them from the photo dealers here in the US, they're somewhere like $45 or so now. I bought a couple of glass rods on the internet to use for the 16 by 20s. I think I paid like $18 for 2 20-inch long glass rods. So like I said, you don't need the handle on it. You could buy the glass rods and kind of glue something on yourself, or you can just hold on to the 2 edges, the 2 corners, and just drag the glass rod across the paper. So it works fine that way. And that's how I do it with the big 16 by 20 paper. So
I've got 3 questions.
shoot.
So would there be any advantage to laying down a layer of gelatin on the paper first and then coating it with the emulsion?
No, I don't see any advantage whatsoever.
Okay.
You need to do that with a glass plate, though.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, the
absolutely
emulsion doesn't stick to glass very well. As soon as
Nope.
you stick it in your chemicals
Mhm.
to develop it, it'll float away. So I've
And
tried
then-
that.
Second question
I went through
is
that process too.
with the glass rod, are you doing 2 coats or just 1?
No, just one.
Okay.
You can vary the thickness by how many wraps of Mylar tape you put around the end. The 7 wraps works pretty well for me.
Okay.
I don't think you need any more than that for bromoils. I've been doing it this way for a number of years now, and it seems to work pretty well. So
Can you explain that again? That you're putting Mylar tape on the ends, like
the
wrapping
very
it around
ends, yes,
to make it stand off of the surface.
yeah, the Mylar tape determines the thickness of the emulsion.
Okay, good.
So I bought a roll of Mylar tape that's about 1/4 of an inch wide, and you just wrap it around the end of the glass. And
Okay.
in my case, I did it 7 times around, and it gives you a thickness of emulsion, and you can play around with it to see what works for you. It seems to work for me. You can go thicker, you can go thinner, doesn't matter. So I have a print here to show you just for demonstration purposes. By the way, if you've been hesitant about this whole liquid emulsion thing and about what the quality of the prints are that you can get doing it yourself, instead, as opposed to just making silver prints, as opposed to buying commercial silver paper, you're in for a shock at how good and how beautiful the prints look. And the glass rod coating, as I said, gives you very, very consistent thickness all the way through. Works really, really well. So I have one print here I've been working on. So if you go on the top of your screen in the top right corner and do a speaker view instead of gallery view. And okay. How do they see me, Austin? I'm seeing you.
Oh,
Do you have to make me the speaker?
There you go. We can see you.
Okay. I see Thomas, but on my screen anyway. This is a 16 by 20 print. Okay. And this is liquid emulsion. And the quality that you get out of this stuff is really, really good. I was really amazed by this. The thing about this print was you need to overexpose your negative a little bit, your print a little bit. And this came out just about right for a normal silver print.
What range are you using? Is that like a 2?
What's that?
What tonal range is this emulsion? Is it a 1, 2, or 3?
3. The FOMA has a contrast rate of about 3. So
Okay.
All right. So this is the
What's the paper, Dan?
print. Yeah, what's that?
What is the paper?
Oh, this is Hanamuli Platinum Rag. I also use Arches Platine. So this is the straight silver print. And I'll come up in close here, but you can kind of see this is a really nice print. The finish, it's got a really beautiful satin look to it, satin finish to it, unlike anything that I've ever seen commercially made.
I love it.
And then here's the Bromoil print that I've been working on as well. I think I got a little bit of fine touch-up work I still want to do on this one, but you can get really nice detail out of this stuff too, as well. So
Now you said the FOMA paper came with did it come with a bleaching agent?
a hardener.
A
Comes with
hardener.
a hardener.
Okay.
Now
Well, that's good. But we're having a problem here in Europe of getting a hardener, so they've banned it.
well, they banned potassium dichromate,
Right.
but the hardener is not a difficult chemical to make yourself. I don't know the stuff that goes into it, but I think it's chrome alum that is put in it.
Oh,
So,
I've got the chrome alum,
yeah.
but
Yeah,
I have that hardener, but
yeah. Now some of the oil printers out there do some of the oil printers do add some hardener to their emulsion when they coat. I know that František Struhal, who's in our group, he's the printer up in British Columbia who does really big prints, oil prints. He puts a little hardener in his. I've never bothered doing it myself. So
I think maybe we're not on the same page because I was talking about the Bromoil process.
yes.
And I was just curious, you had mentioned that it was something you threw away.
Oh, that's the little bottle of hardener that comes with the foam emulsion.
Oh, okay. So it's just
That's
to harden the emulsion.
Yeah, it's to harden the surface of the emulsion. But as a
Okay.
Bromoil print, you don't necessarily want it hard because you want it to be able to accept the ink and to soak the water. So, and that's what the hardener is, what the commercial silver paper has nowadays in it, which is why a lot of it doesn't work very well for Bromoils. So I have a bunch of bottles of hardener if anybody wants one.
Dan, was that print off an 8x10 neg?
Yes.
Okay. So
And
how long was the
yep.
exposure roughly?
Yeah,
Was it
this negative had a density, if I remember right, of about 0.7 or so.
Yeah.
And this is an 8x10 negative enlarged to 16x20, and the exposure on this one was about in the enlarger was about 20 seconds or so, 15 seconds.
Oh, so it's quite sensitive. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it is very well. Yeah, the sensitivity of the liquid emulsion is just like commercial paper. So it's not slow. So but you make little test exposures of your lights and the darks and on your print and decide what do you need to turn out the print for the Bromoil, because you need to overexpose it by 1/2 to 3/4 of a stop. You need to darken things down because with the liquid emulsion and the inking process that I do, it's very difficult to get ink to stick to the highlights. And you've got very subtle tonal differences in your highlights. You've got to make the print down, the exposure down to darken it up and not worry so much about the blacks. That's why if you've got a negative that's got a wide density range and you overprint the whites, your blacks are going to go all super black, and it's going to take you 45 minutes in the bleaching and tanning process. And it's interesting. I bleached a couple of prints last night, one for James, who's not on right now, to try working with the conventional process, Bromoil process, and the print cleared in about 3 minutes in the bleaching and tanning process. The other print I had, which I made along with it, which is one of my own prints, it took about 25 minutes to bleaching and tanning. And I've always wondered about this issue of, because the emulsion is thicker in what I do, it takes a long time in the bleaching and tanning process. Is there any effect or potential issue with over tanning your matrix? Because sometimes I have my prints in my bleaching chemicals for 40 minutes or 45 minutes or more. So it's that long. And they come out lime green.
I've always understood that you can over tan.
You know, I've read that before, but everything that's written about that is all based on commercial silver paper, which has thin emulsions. Nobody has written anything about thicker emulsions. So, and there's very little information out there on doing Bromoils with liquid emulsion. The 2 books that I showed there, they've got like 1 page, and that's it.
Right. I've actually done this process before, and to answer Tony, I used the brush method
Yes.
for my liquid emulsion on some very fibrous paper, and I was shooting for the full 10-minute recommended 10 minutes of tanning or bleaching, and it started to lift the emulsion, so I pulled it out quickly. But after that, it was after I super dried, it was fine.
Yeah, it's very sensitive. The liquid emulsion is very sensitive. Your temperature of your water gets too high. If you're up at about 79 degrees or more, I've had situations like that where the whole emulsion just lifts right off the sheet of paper in little tiny particles. Frustrating when that happens, but
So I wanted to throw out this question as well, because when I when I tried this and failed, I soaked the paper and then did the brush method. So I'm curious why dry for brush method and wet for rod.
So what didn't work when you tried that?
Well, I think somewhere along the way I exposed the paper. So I'm
Okay.
not sure what
Well,
happened.
That has nothing to do with the coating process then. I don't know. I don't know why you would. I have coated with a brush a lot of times before, and there's no reason to soak the paper. The paper lays flat; it doesn't curl up. It brushes just fine. Thomas, you've done that before. You know, it's not.
Yeah, sometimes I get it. Sometimes I get a little bit of bowing and curling, but it really that's because I'm using a very heavy fiber-based paper. And that's
if you're using
best of days.
if you're using paper that's like Arches Platine or the Hahnemühle paper, the stuff that's around 300 grams of paper weight, you shouldn't have any problems with that because that paper is pretty thick. So if you're going to try some thinner paper, you might experience some curling problems.
Yeah,
that was 300 grams. I'm going to remember that.
Yeah,
and I'm using that platinum rag. So okay, so I'm gonna try it again, and I'm not gonna soak the paper this time. So I want to stick with the brush method since that's what I have.
It's the easiest way to go starting off.
Nice.
So,
and then how long do you let it dry between coats?
Emil talks about this in his books, and he says that you can coat it fairly soon afterwards, like 45 minutes later. It can actually still be a little bit tacky, and you can coat it again.
Okay.
So, but when you brush it, it starts to set up and dry fairly quickly because you're not worrying about the paper drying. It's just the emulsion setting up itself. So
I would be careful though, because if it is tacky in any spot, it might have been a little thicker and a little longer to dry. The brush is going to stick right to it, and it's going to pull the emulsion off of it. I've done that a few times.
And do you have a measurement for how much emulsion to use based on?
Yes.
10, 11 by 14, so on and so forth.
11 by 14 paper takes about 50 to 55 milliliters of solution. And 16 by 20 paper takes about 80 milliliters.
Okay.
So you can do the math and figure out how much you get out of a liter of material, or in the case of the Rolly, if you got one of the smaller bottles, it's the same way. So
awesome.
And when you coat the paper, especially with the glass rod coating, it's a thick coating that sits on top of the paper. But when the paper dries, it's dead flat and dead smooth. It's like it sets down into the paper, or it shrinks when it cures or whatever.
Right.
So,
awesome.
Is that the brand that you're using, the Rolly?
No, I use Foma. I've used Rolly before, and it works just the same. It's just as good. It's just more expensive. That's all.
Oh, okay.
And one more thing. So the dealer out here, Freestyle Photo in California, is who I buy all my emulsion from. Sometimes they have sales for outdated emulsion, and I bought their outdated stuff before and have had no problems whatsoever. The stuff I have right now, the print I just showed you, the emulsion was expired over a year ago because there is an expiration date on it. So, but I had no problems with it whatsoever. And I said you save about 25 or 30% on the cost.
What was their
Freestyle Photographic in LA.
Thank you.
B&H Photo in New York is the other company that sells all this stuff too.
I'm familiar with B&H. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
For Dan, sorry,
Yes.
I just have a 30-second question for Dan, Thomas, or anyone else. Have you used liquid emulsion on any really thin papers, like washy papers? Not for Bromoil, but just generally, have you had success? Is there anything different than coating like with a 300 gram?
No.
Okay.
Thomas and I are on.
I would say yes.
Okay.
I've
coated about everything you can think of. Rocks and pieces of tile. Tiles like glass, you have to coat it with a gelatin first. Just about everything. And the thinner that paper gets, the more that it's going to warp the paper.
I had some some old fogged Kentmere black and white paper that was fogged badly. And so I fixed out the paper and tried brush coating onto that. And it was horrible. The paper just kind of buckled up like a potato chip. There was no way I could use it at all. The interesting was, because I tried making exposures with it, doing contact rinse. The interesting thing was I coated it both on the back side and the front side. This is glossy paper to try it out. And the exposure on the glossy side actually turned out kind of glossy looking for the foamy emulsion, which I did not expect, but it did. But neither side worked at all for me. So I threw away the box of paper, so it didn't work for me that way. So
Got it. Okay. And Thomas, you worked on like really thin, like a thin, like washy type paper before, or no, just more thicker items?
Yeah, absolutely. I've tried it on things as delicate as toilet tissue, and leaves, you know, like garden leaves, especially this time of year. I find tree leaves that I like to do emulsion on. Right now, I'm a little short of emulsion, so I'm going to be checking out Freestyle pretty quick. But my advice is that once you get yourself a good bottle, and I would start with a small one, a small bottle, 250 milliliters, I think it is.
yeah, the Rolly comes in 300 milliliters or a liter. Yeah,
you're bound to make some kind of mistake early on, and it's better to do it with a small bottle than a 1 liter. I've made that mistake too.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. I found a good thin paper that's handling photogravure. It can handle really long wash times. It's like a very thin washy paper, really light. You do have to shin collate it through a press later to allow it to mount onto something heavier. But yeah, I've tried it with cyanotype. It works extremely well. And I'm just curious to try it with liquid emulsion because I don't know anyone here who's done it before. So I'm kind of curious, but I guess there's nothing else to do but give it a try and see how it goes.
Megan, where in Canada did you live?
I'm in Edmonton, Alberta.
Oh, okay. Frantisek is over in British Columbia. But he turns out prints that are like, you know, really big. And he actually sells them himself, and he sells them through a gallery, but he's a very experienced oil printer. Another
To
Canadian.
go for a visit.
Yeah. And
I have one more for you.
go ahead, Thomas.
Okay. Dan, I have one more question. It's about this your gelatin layer, if you have to use one. Do you do any of the kind of liquid emulsion printing where
No.
you use a gelatin layer?
No, I don't do gelatin layers, no. I just do the emulsion straight on the paper.
Okay, all right. So I guess what I'll do is I'll put in our chat a good recipe for the gelatin mixture. It needs something that we mentioned earlier, which is chrome alum.
Yeah.
I had a bottle of it somewhere around here. Chrome alum, and that's a hardener.
Yeah.
And you actually have to add that hardener to the gelatin layer, or that's going to just wash away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I have also heard that, and I've never tried this before, I never wanted to worry about it, that when in the books that talk about making your own liquid emulsion, that if you add a little bit of developer to your emulsion right before you coat it, you can potentially increase the contrast range in your image. But it would be experimenting, and I don't want to waste my emulsion on experiments like that. So, and the FOMA has a pretty wide contrast range itself. So, but if you're making your own and it turns out kind of flat, that's another thing. You can add some D76 or something to it a little bit, but you might want to do a little research on it before you try it. So.
And Megan, I just want to throw out, I did some experimenting with Bromoil transfer, Shinkolay Bromoil transfer. So if that's something that you're experimenting with, would love to stay in touch with you on that, because I did a couple. They did not come out great. It was very, at least the paper stuck, but it was very I don't want the ink just kind of spread, so I didn't have definition.
Yeah. Yeah. It's its own little finicky process, which is, yeah.
But that's what I want to keep experimenting with. Well, cool. Any other questions for Dan? And if some of y'all want to hang on to the call for a few more minutes, Thomas and I were going to do a quick kind of brief on what we've been up to with trying to put together some type of meet and greets / workshop / exhibition for the group. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording right now.